Okie dokie. So today I thought would be a good time to sort of make a video on a topic that another user on the subreddit for Crossout posted very recently, based off of not only their build but also another related build which I actually suggested as a result of discussion on the first build there. So to start with, looking at the post made by user Ologolos, I assume that's how you pronounce it. I don't even know if Ologolos is a thing actually, or if there's a pronunciation for it. Yeah, so I'm just going to assume that I'm pronouncing it correct because it's convenient. But in any case, they posted about making a bait car. So the gist being that it is a fully functional craft that looks like it's been beat up in battle. So just me showcasing obviously what they've uploaded so far, some different perspectives. I feel like the video is a really, honestly, like the best example of it, so I'm going to be opening that up afterwards. But in any case, you can see that it's a, functional car. It has reputation bonus on it, has a bunch of armor, has, different modules and whatnot. So as far as the list of features that they have here, this is obviously just different ways they're talking about how they make it look like a craft that has been through some combat and is currently at least partially disabled, to try and lure in people who are just looking for a easy kill. So the video, I think, again, being the best showcase of this, you can see the particle effects from the different decor, showing off fire and smoke and really selling the effect of it. The sideways tire on the ground, interestingly I'll note, is a nice touch, because that's what happens when a wheel gets shot off, or parts get shot off, is they tend to kind of scatter on the ground nearby. I feel like while the character is moving, it's a little bit more obvious that it's fake, because they don't tend to spin around in a circle when the vehicle has parts blown off of it. But in any case, if one were to pop the handbrake and then stay still and then fire up the engine still, so there's still the fire effect on the wheel on the side, it might be a little bit more deceiving. But in any case, a build spinning in circle after being partially disabled is 100% the exact sort of thing you see in multiplayer all the time. And under normal circumstances, before I saw this post, it's definitely the sort of thing where I just assumed that they'd been in combat and they'd have taken a lot of damage. So I'm not going to go over like a full breakdown of the build, because I feel like it's pretty straightforward, and there's obviously a plethora of different ways that you could approach making a build like this or improving on it. Other than just the wheel comment, I think the only other thing I'd say is probably making the modules a little bit more consistent as far as having the wheels, because you have the two purple Bigfoot wheels at the back and then a bunch of blue, significantly lower tier tires in the front. You could get away with, I think, especially for the inner wheel that's hidden from the outside, I think you could probably get away with running a better one there. That being said, if the expectation is to run the shitty wheels on purpose that they'll get shot off, then, I mean, obviously having the additional tonnage left over is not so much of a problem. At the same time, I'd just be worried that having like obvious high-level wheels at the back would make it a little bit more suspicious compared with the lower tier front wheels. Additionally, you can look at how the tire that's on the ground doesn't match, but I think for people just flying on by or looking for kills or whatnot, that's not going to be something super noticeable. Obviously, though, you could swap it out for the appropriate tires that would match. There's also something specific I'll talk about with which tires you can use for, I think, potentially a better effect. That's something I'll discuss later a little bit. So there was discussion on this where they were talking about additional ways you can hide it. So using the quarter barrel pieces to make fake barrels as well. I'm not actually sure what they mean by nomad piece. I thought the barrel quarter was a scavenger piece, but I guess I'll double check. And I was referring to how there's a bait car in exhibition that was the only other bait car I've seen that's an example of that. So closing that. So this is the example of it being posted on the exhibition. So this was posted a long time ago. I don't even know, like, they don't include dates or anything, but it's really early on in my liked list in any case for builds. So it's been posted up there for a while. And it's pretty straightforward as far as the idea of it. So it's doing the same thing where you are looking like easy prey, but actually being a fully functional vehicle, or to whatever degree you want to consider it functional to have, you know, a bunch of exposed lances and only running 2 actual wheels while over tonnage or whatnot. But in any case, it's another build focused obviously on deception. So it's using, as you could probably tell, a bunch of lances on the front. Then for actual movement parts, it does use the gun mount wheels underneath, which sort of makes it a bicycle shape. And that does allow it to tip over in game and sort of give the appearance of being flipped. And then all of the tires up here are the spare CKs. So twin spare, single spare, military spare, etc. So likewise with my comment of using like the similar wheels to the ones on the craft, for Ologolos' build, I'd probably look at doing the same thing, so including APC wheels on the front of the build, and then including a military spare as just one on the ground as the fake one blown off. That being said, they could be pretty pricey depending on the platform and availability. It doesn't look like it's actually too bad here, but I guess there's been some renewed interest recently based off of all the other offers at that price, whereas beforehand there wasn't a whole lot. I don't recall where you get this one from. I guess it might be the Decoy container. But I know you can't just go and like explicitly craft these spare tires, so you could definitely see some pretty high prices on some of them compared to like even just the pertinent actual items for it. Notably, otherwise, they have barrels on the top, which are obviously meant to look like the fuel tank and fuel barrel. And you can see that they've used some pieces upside down to really sell the idea. So having the engine on the upper front there, having the chameleon on the upper back, having those flipped upside down, as well as a pseudo plow / pseudo wedge look on the front to really sort of sell the idea. But it still has full mobility. You still have a cloak. I think the big thing with it is you aren't going to be able to spin the CK tires on the top. So having something like actually revving up the build like you would with maybe Ologolos would not, in my eyes, be as good of a selling point. Because although you do have particles which could be distracting, the particles will only show up when tires are spinning, generally speaking. It's very obvious the ones on the top are not. So I'd probably focus on likewise being stationary and then sort of turning into enemies as they show up. To what degree that's successful, I don't know. Because I'm not the original creator of this, Camel Mars 18 is the person who posted it. I don't know if they were the original creator either, but in any case, they're obviously the author of this specific build. I don't know what the play style is. Like, there's obviously a cloak, so I assume that they would generally try and cloak and get in position like a regular build, but instead of trying to not be seen, try to be in a place that is very obviously seen, and then hopefully have people approach them there. That being said, as with probably most of the community, I have an innate fear of lance builds, so even if I saw one flipped, I would be very hesitant to drive up to it, and I would much more likely try and shoot off the lances more than anything else, especially because of their low durability, and again, how I suspect the build would be played, which is being stationary with it. But I mean, it's certainly an interesting idea. I don't think it would necessarily be as successful as Ologolos's, but it's the sort of thing too where you don't necessarily have to use lances either. You could maybe do something where you slap a Yongwang underneath so that you have the ability to bounce shots off the ground in multiple directions. You could use something like the Waltz or whatnot, especially because if you have the bicycle configuration where it's tipped, you shouldn't really have issues with the ground blocking your shots other than if you're on hills. As far as what this build actually would quote-unquote look like as I stall it. Not that I would necessarily suggest doing this, but I suppose you could also, struggle hard with the bike configuration. You could purposefully flip it so that it's looking right side up, but actually upside down, and then you could try and sort of like bullfight people where you like, this is killing me, where you try and wait for them to charge you and then flip. If I see a build stationary, especially a lance, I'm just going to assume they're AFK, but again, due to the nature of lances, I wouldn't really want to just like drive up to it and hope it doesn't kill me. Whether or not, again, other people are doing it differently or not, I could not say for sure as somebody who has not authored or used this kind of build in multiplayer before. I don't think me flipping it is going to happen. Could obviously like copy it and then edit it and then try and like force flip it with a skinner or something, but I'm not. There we go. Excellent. Cool. So it makes it a lot more obvious that there's the tires here, although you could probably cover it up underneath, quote unquote underneath now on the top of the build with armor a little bit better, because this obviously sells, like, if you didn't see the wheel spinning or the wheels at all, you'd probably be really inclined to think that this is just the build right side up and AFK or whatnot. So at that point you could probably like flip to try and dodge people getting by you or something. I don't know. It's kind of hard to showcase with the lances getting caught on bricks. But in any case, you should be able to get a little bit of movement out of that. To what degree, I don't know, but those are just other thoughts. Likewise, I try and make the top of the build look a bit more like the frames on the bottom. So I would probably look at using more of the buggy frame parts, or well, just the buggy parts in general. Due to them already having some of the pass-through look of the frames, I think those would sell a little bit better than just having the armor underneath. Likewise, you could also look at using some parts that are flipped inside out, or upside down, I guess, rather, which also sort of have the meshing that somewhat resembles frames. So you could do that with some of the van parts, and you could also do that with some of the scavenger parts, metal boxes. I mean, nothing is going to be a perfect replication, of course, but anything that gets close to it I think will help. As far as the barrel quarters that I'm talking about, these are obviously the scavenger parts, which I suspect they were going for. Interestingly, in the bait car here, it has the larger one in silver and the smaller one in black. That's peculiar to me because in the actual inventory it's the other way around, where the larger tank is more black and the smaller tank is more like of a lighter silver color. So I'd probably swap those so that the smaller one is the brighter color. But in any case, I imagine if you're already deceiving people as to like those being tanks period, I don't think the color is going to make too big of a difference. But of course, running, you know, whatever you can to help will hopefully assist in the goal. So interesting note on the tire thing I was talking about, especially if you're trying to hug the ground closer, which is I imagine more true in this build than maybe the other one. But the low clearance wheels are really a boon for that. So I've posted a couple of videos already on the topic, but to rehash it again rather than having to link it on top of the other videos that I'm going to have to link for this this video, if you have something, I'm just going to use the cockpit because it's really close to the ground, so it emphasizes the effect. If you have irregular wheels or whatnot, especially if you're trying to be upside down, there's basically a 2 pip difference between you and the ground if you're running larger wheels like the Bigfoot, or especially the actual quote-unquote large wheel that's increased. Obviously it goes all the way up to big rams, which are useful for lifting builds so you can see underneath them if you need additional clearance but you aren't getting high enough from a lift. That's a poor example, but if I do this, you can see it gets you significantly higher off the ground than if you didn't have a big ground. But in any case, so the clearance is a factor, certainly, for different builds, how far you are off the ground. Now, while it does limit your under armor options for the build, you can also use something like low clearance. So as the name suggests, it has a ridiculously low amount of clearance between the ground. So that's going to allow you to run a lot tighter to the ground if you're trying to sort of have a build that seems to be limping along, like Ologolos. Now I would probably put these pieces significantly further out. But if I just estimate the length of the build around there and the cabin to be about there, then using the low clearance wheels on the front is going to give you a significantly higher slant than even using other medium or smaller wheels. So you can see this is almost twice as slanted. The low clearance wheel doesn't even touch the ground when they're both equipped. So this I think would be useful. I've seen people use them as interior wheels already quite a bit. So especially if you're trying to sell your wheels being shot off on the outside, I think having something like that could certainly work, especially if you did end up keeping some of those lower durability wheels on the outside. Like that. Now in the case that they are shot off, you obviously have even further slant, but you don't lose full mobility of the front. Or you could even purposefully run a build where you have them like that, where you're still in contact with the ground on the front and therefore can still steer, but it slants the entire build and makes it look like you lost a wheel on the other side and are like completely immobilized when you're not moving. So that would probably be some of the other like ideas I would look to apply to the other to like doing a bait style car like Ologolos's. It would probably also work for the bait car, like I said, if you were like actually flipping this upside down so it looked right side up, because then they would stick out of the top a lot less, and it would be a pretty simple matter to just slap some Under Armour. So I'm going to do a poor example of this where it isn't actually connected to anything. But if you did want to slap on some armor like that, obviously even if you're completely upside down, your wheels are going to be completely hidden. So this might be a bad example for the sake of I'm not so sure that the tire is actually going to be able to touch the ground. But I don't know how much clearance it has. So it looks like you can still stay at that, for instance. You might be better off just moving it up a pip and then hoping that people don't end up seeing them, or running just like other smaller wheels other than the gun mounts to begin with. So the buggy wheels, for instance, are still pretty tiny compared to the other like full-size wheels. But it's going to be a lot more compact on the bottom of the build. And obviously having a lower clearance on the bottom, if you did go with the second bait style car with the lances, is probably also going to assist with decreasing the likelihood of somebody seeing the tires underneath. Obviously there is a non-zero chance that somebody's going to see those wheels, especially if you do end up having this build's almost perfect balancing where it's constantly teetering from left to right. I'd probably want it to be purposefully leaning one direction or the other, but maybe that's something that they ended up just doing by like hiding alongside a wall or something, so they got pushed over to one side. So if I make this a bit more obvious. I think it's the sort of thing where you could probably see the wheels if you're from, you know, the one side, where if you're using lower profile wheels, obviously there'll be hopefully less of that. An additional comment that could also be worth considering is using the variable height wheels like the Stallion or the Camber wheels from the Syndicate Battle Pass. So as a result of being variable height, you can decrease the amount of clearance you have at will. You can also balance and launch yourself under some certain applications, some certain circumstances with the Stallion wheel specifically, but that's just a bug more so than I think something you'd want to build around. But in any case, that obviously offers a bunch of benefits for anything you're doing with these sort of builds. So if I go back a bit, go back to the low clearance wheel on the front. and then have it offset. And then having the variable height, which are almost approximately the same amount of, clearance off the ground as the other ones, does allow you to sort of slant on demand. Maybe a little bit more noticeably with the stallion. So that would allow you to have your build sort of lopsided while you're baiting, but still allow you to have regular things when you're driving over the ground, trying to go around hills or trying to drive straight or whatnot. So as a sort of continuation of that idea, which is where I was starting, this is where I was going from, going towards when I said something I've talked about in other videos. But it's interesting to note that the Stallion and Caper wheels, as a result of how low they are off the ground, can actually do some shenanigans with Cheetah engine and some other choice things. The Cheetah is probably the most obvious one from the get-go. So this is something I've discussed before, and this is something I've even shown with the build here, where basically whenever your wheels are suspended above the ground, you can actually charge items that are charged off of distance, because they go, I guess, off of the rotation of the tire or off of your KPH rather than the actual distance covered by the build. So you can actually charge things while as part of a fusion build, or for instance in the case of being a bait car, doing something like that. So for instance, if I wanted to do that, you can see that as a result of the Cheetah spinning up really fast because it thinks I'm going fast off the ground, I can very frequently get the Chameleon back up. So with the combination of the Blight and the Cheetah, you can actually even sustain it, where as soon as your cloak runs out, you Blight, fire, and then pretty much by the time your Blight runs out or your weapon overheats, you're able to go cloaked again, and then by the time the cloak's done, your weapons are no longer overheated and your Blight is recharged. So there's a few interesting things you can do with that. On another micro build topic, I was showing how you could do that with fuse drones or turrets. Now I don't have any drones anymore, but to still prove the point of what I'm talking about, I'll just use this as an example. So normally, of course, you would plant your turret device, whatever, and then as you drive around, once they're done, you're able to recharge them, but that requires you to generally cover a lot of ground. But again, just utilizing the same thing as beforehand, if you manage to sort of prop yourself up off the ground with the devices, which is not currently working, and I question why. I'm not crazy, I promise. I've done this before. Wonder if maybe I just need to move them down another pip. I thought it was directly connected to the cabin. Yuck. Around, and then probably not have it being forward facing, so you can suspend yourself on the ground. Probably also separate the keybinds for the two buttons, but for instance I can be stationary while still spinning up the Cheetah, and as a result spinning up the gadget some more. So that's another thing that might be useful for the bait cars, especially if you did end up using something that was more so a drone carrier, like one carrying a bunch of fuse drones. then you'd be able to spin up a bunch, summon your fused runner, in this case the barrier, whatever, and then when you needed to actually just still be able to drive away. Yeah, so I don't know how many of the things I discussed about in this video are like intended or not, especially this last quote-unquote 2 features with being able to charge the cheetah while suspended. That being said, this is a topic I brought up a few times and nothing's happened as a result of it, so whether or not that ends up changing, I don't know. If it does as a result of the video, I apologize. But yeah, so bait cars in general are obviously really interesting, and being able to like fight not only literally in the game, but also sort of like psychological warfare on the enemies, working against what they expect and how they intuit situations. So, I mean, it's been a big part of gaming, even in like tactical shooters or like survivals games, like any of them, or even survival game modes in shooters like Infected in like the Call of Duty series, like Modern Warfare. I remember specifically in Modern Warfare 3, there was a map, I can't remember the name of it, I want to say it was, yeah, I got no clue what it is. But in any case, it was a town, and you had a mannequin shop or a clothing shop that had mannequins, and one of the most effective hiding places was standing in the middle of the shop on top of one of the studio rings. This is vague. I'm gonna try and see if I can find.
Attention, the following
is. Yeah, see, so this was literally it, like just hiding. Obviously, you don't normally have the bright colored names above the characters unless you explicitly look directly at them with your crosshair. But in any case, it's the sort of thing where you can hide pretty effectively by just doing things that people don't expect, blending into the scenery, even if you aren't actually blended in the scenery. So yeah, would definitely be interested in seeing more of these kind of builds, although a little bit scared of what that might end up looking like. On the topic of the, trick builds, that's something that I'm going to kind of make a follow-up video on tomorrow, once the submission for the IVXO contest draws to a close, because I have a idea that I'm submitted for that, but I'm not so sure if I want the video out there yet. Because I don't want people to just rip my idea, submit it, and then end up getting either of us removed from the competition for having copy builds or whatnot. So there's something to look forward to. Another video if people end up watching these and being interested in more. There'll be another one tomorrow, sort of along the same line of trick builds.